I'm Brandi Kruse. Coming up today on Undivided, Democrats in Olympia are running out of time to come up with a budget plan, and we're just waiting to see who's going to get screwed over with new taxes. Plus, a major conflict of interest involving the lawmaker who's spearheading rent control. And Washington State sues President Donald Trump over his efforts to improve election integrity. That and much more coming up today on Undivided. Remember, you can support our show for just $5 a month by signing up at undividedpod.com. And right now, military, veterans, and first responders get 30% off their first year of Undivided by using the promo code USA. Hello, friends. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Undivided. I'm Brandi Kruse. Thank you for supporting our mission and our movement to give common sense a comeback. Sorry for ditching you yesterday. Sorry, not sorry. Maybe now is a good time to let them know, because people were so disappointed we didn't have a live show yesterday, that we don't have live shows all week next week. I'm just going to break the news and rip the Band-Aid off right now. The entire team is taking a week off.
Spring break,
the entire team. Nicole's going somewhere fancy. Daryl's going on his honeymoon to Portugal. I'm going to Cabo. Not the best timings, considering the legislative session is winding down, but I don't know if Democrats are really doing anything right now anyway. For 6 days, they have been wheeling and dealing amongst themselves behind the scenes, trying to decide who to screw over with their taxes. This, of course, came after last week. Governor Bob Ferguson came out and said, I'm not signing a budget that balances based on a wealth tax that we don't even know if it'll hold up. And I'm sorry, but he said during that press conference he'd have more information on the remaining taxes and where he sits with them within 24 to 48 hours. I haven't heard anything yet. I do know that Democrats in Olympia have a leadership press conference happening tomorrow at 12:30. So it sounds to me like that might be when they announce whatever sort of agreement that they come to, but no outcome here is going to be good. No outcome is going to be good with Democrats at the helm. So if the wealth tax is out of the equation, do they rely on property tax increases and increases on taxes against businesses? Probably. Maybe they came up with other things behind the scenes that will help them balance the budget. But you know, they have shown no interest in having a budget that really looks at serious cuts to just wasteful first world desires from the Democrats, like funding laser hair removal for trans inmates. I know I bring that one up a lot, but when you tell me that we're suffering so bad that you have to increase taxes on homeowners to the point where many of them won't be able to afford to live in the homes that they've lived in for decades, and you are simultaneously funding things like laser hair removal for transgender inmates, you just lost me there. So to me, that is the best example of how irresponsible Democrats are with our money, and they believe that anything that sounds nice and anything that might even be nice should be funded by you, the taxpayers. So we're waiting to see how this shakes out. I've already said I think homeowners are going to be the ones screwed over in this, and businesses. I heard some whispers about them maybe reducing the threshold for the capital gains tax, but just a little insider baseball. Today is the fiscal committee cutoff, which means that any sort of fiscal proposal would have to emerge out of, for instance, Senate Ways and Means. And so, if it hasn't been introduced already, I'm not sure that they're going to come up with something brand new. Although, apparently, while they're behind the scenes amongst themselves, hiding from the public, working out how they're going to screw you over for the last 6 days, they did come up with one brand new tax in the nick of time. A really important one, too. I don't know what Washington would do without this tax. This was filed yesterday? Yesterday. House Bill 2071, a tax on online dating. Yes, you out there looking for punishment. If you're out there in the depths, bowels of the internet looking for a lover, technically the tax isn't on you. It's on the company whose online dating site that you're using. But it's just it shows like they will find anything to tax. If they can find one thing that's not being taxed to their liking, they will seek it out. Like a bird dog. They will sniff it out and they will find a tax for it. So this says an act relating to generating resources to combat domestic violence by imposing an excise tax on owners of online dating applications. The rate of the tax is $1 per resident individual member per month. So if like What is it? What is a popular dating website?
Hinge.
Plenty of fish. Hinge.
I don't know if people still use
eHarmony.
that one, yeah.
So if they've got like 1 million users in Washington state, that's $1 million per month in a tax. And I imagine there's probably 1 million online daters.
Well, it's interesting because you can pay. I wonder if that's paid subscriptions to websites or whether just registered, because you can do free and you can do paid for.
It had a now you're going to force me to look it up.
Sorry,
it had a thing in there. It said, I think you can look in it. I should have pulled that up. Sorry. But it had something about that in there. I just don't remember what it was.
Okay.
But $1 per user. So they're behind the scenes trying to figure out who to screw over with new taxes. But they did at least come up with one person to fight domestic violence. Which, are you more prone to commit an act of domestic violence
if you
meet someone? No, if you meet someone online versus if you meet someone at a bar or in nature. Honestly, if you're going to tax something to fight domestic violence, add $1 tax to booze. Booze is probably the biggest driver of domestic violence that there is. I'm not saying add additional taxes to booze. I don't think you need additional taxes for anything. But as we're all waiting to figure out whether we can still afford to live in our homes and are urging Democrats to budget financially, they're just already at this point in the session introducing new taxes. And they're even inventing more ways to spend money. They're literally inventing problems in the backdrop of all this. They're inventing problems or making those problems worse through their own actions so they can spend more of your money on them. One case in point with this is all their activity around hate crimes. So we've already said, so they came up with a hate crime hotline. That was a invention of Bob Ferguson, where the hate crime hotline, it doesn't have any sort of threshold for any evidentiary threshold. It's like, hey, if you feel like you were the victim of a microaggression, call this hotline and we'll even give you resources. But most importantly, we'll add a little tally to the number of hate crimes in the state of Washington. And they did that, of course. It's important to understand the trajectory here because it all has to do with just spending more money and painting conservatives as like evil people. You pass the hate crime hotline. Calls start coming in from people on Capitol Hill who like, oh my God, I was misgendered by an Uber driver or whatever it is. Chalk one up to the hate crimes. So all of a sudden what's going to happen? Well, the number of hate crimes in Washington state are going to absolutely go through the roof, right? Because that in their book is a hate crime because they don't call police to investigate to determine whether it actually meets the threshold for being a hate crime or anything like that. They just chalk it up, and then all of a sudden the state and Democrats can come out and say, oh my God, we have so many hate crimes in the state of Washington, we absolutely have to do something about it. So what do they do about it? Well, they spend more money studying the issue. Of course, we've talked a lot on the show about the Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force. So they just put more money in the budget. There's a couple things going on right now in this regard. They put more money in the budget to deal with hate crimes and respond to hate crimes and beef up the worthless Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force. So just a peripheral search of the budget, $935,000, $1.2 million, $250,000, some of that going into this task force, which the goal of the task force is to submit a final report to the governor and appropriate committees of the legislature by December 1st, 2026, to include legislative and policy recommendations. So what that tells me is they're spending all this money to beef up a farce of a task force that's going to present policy recommendations in December of 2026. And what do you think those policy recommendations will entail? They'll entail increased enforcement of hate crimes, task forces, all of these things that'll just end up costing you and me more money. And of course, as I said, some of the additional money that they're spending this on is going to this Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force, which, as we've reported on the show, is just an excuse for a bunch of raging left liberals to sit around a table and talk about their preferred pronouns.
She, her pronouns.
I use she, her pronouns.
She, her pronouns.
I use she, her pronouns.
I use he, him pronouns.
She, her, Sharon.
She, her pronouns.
I use she, her pronouns.
And I use she, her pronouns.
Yeah, we're paying for that. We're also paying for them to have these hours-long meetings where the only thing that they talk about is right-wing extremism in a state where left-wing extremism clearly outweighs any form of right-wing extremism by exponential margins. So we're supposed to believe that they actually care about hate crimes and people who are motivated by hate when they don't care about the Tesla vandalisms, they don't care about Antifa, they don't care about anti-Semitism on campuses, they don't care about taking over 6 square blocks of a city, they don't care about assaults on police officers, whatever it is. So they have a task force that focuses on how evil the right is. So here's the other piece to this puzzle, something that happened in the legislature this past week. They passed House Bill 1052. Which again, this feeds into their whole money pit around making hate crimes a business, okay? Finding ways, so the goal is to scare people so much that hate crimes are so prevalent in our state that we can be convinced to shell out more money to deal with this epidemic of hate, right? So what does House Bill 1052 do? Makes it easier to prosecute people for hate crimes. Now, under the bill, they made one small change which adds a line. A person is guilty of a hate crime offense if the person maliciously and intentionally commits one of the following acts, quote, in whole or in substantial part, because of their perception of another person's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender expression or identity, or mental, physical, or sensory disability. In whole or in substantial part. So if they think that part of you, in the commission of a crime, part of you was motivated by hate toward a particular group, then they can tack on a felony hate crime. Which, of course, just feeds into what will become the hate crime industrial complex. Tip line is step 1, beef up the hate crime numbers with a bunch of angry progressives calling because they think everything is a hate crime. Beef up those numbers, use those numbers to justify dumping millions of dollars into your farce of a domestic violent extremism task force, which is focusing almost exclusively on right-wing violence that almost doesn't exist here. And then pass laws making it easier to prosecute people for hate crimes. Who do you think is going to be, based on the preponderance of evidence, the group of people who is going to be subjected to more hate crime prosecutions under this law? Conservatives, Republicans. And now they can just, it didn't even have to be an out and out, I targeted this person because they were black or transgender or whatever it might be. If a prosecutor thinks that maybe part of you inside, in here, was motivated by hate towards an individual group. It's insane stuff, guys. So this was being debated on the floor, and there was an interesting conversation happening because I do believe that, you know, the hate that we're seeing targeted at people because of their political beliefs should absolutely, if we're putting all these other things in there, and look, if you attack or hurt someone because of the color of their skin, because of their national origin, because of their sexual identity, I do believe that that's a hate crime, and I do believe that that's wrong, and it's un-American, obviously. But why is it any less bad if you're targeting someone, vandalizing their property, hurting someone because you don't like who they voted for president? Like, the fact that we don't protect political beliefs in the same way, it just shows, you know, how skewed all of this is. So Senator Phil Fortunato made an effort to, because this is insider baseball, but something interesting happened here. They got Republicans on a committee to vote in favor of this bill because they took out the language that was like in part. So they agreed to do that, and they passed this amendment that made it more workable. And then when it went to the floor, they took that amendment away. So like they totally pulled one over on Republicans, made it like palatable, and then it got to the floor and they just reverted it to how it was. Isn't that crazy? But anyway, so Republicans knew this was going to pass. They were trying to improve it, and Senator Phil Fortunato introduced what he called the Tesla amendment, obviously with all the Tesla owners being attacked because Orange Man and Elon Musk bad. And he said that maybe we should add, you know, like the protections here for what constitutes a hate crime if someone was motivated by animus toward, I don't know, the owner of an electric car company.
To explain this in a very simple term, Mr. President, this is a Tesla amendment. A person makes an economic choice to buy a particular product, and because of that, they are targeted. It's exactly what a hate crime is. Because of a certain, in some cases, the race or ethnicity, those people are targeted. Well, this is simply a person making an economic choice to buy a certain product or a certain, in this case, car, So for that reason, and we could see what's happening, fire bombs and all this other stuff. That's clearly a hate crime, Mr. President, so I urge your support.
I mean, it is kind of crazy when you think about it. All the things categorized as hate crime, the emphasis on that, and the focus on hate-driven crime in Olympia, and firebombing a Tesla because you don't like the president of the United States and Elon Musk isn't a hate crime. It's kind of wild, right? So leave it to Democratic State Senator Manka Dhingra to stand up and say no to this amendment.
Mr. President, I have been working on hate crimes since 9/11 after a Sikh cab driver was assaulted in Seattle. I've been working on hate crimes for a very long time. And this is an extremely technical, nuanced part of our law.
We're dumb.
Because
what
you have at play are First Amendment rights, and you have the protection of a constitutionally protected class. You have to belong to that constitutionally protected class that is outlined in our laws in Washington. And Mr. President, making economic choices or owning a Tesla is not a protected class.
Right, but that's exactly what Senator Phil Fortunato is arguing. He's arguing that maybe given what's happening, it should be.
To dovetail with Senator Dhingra's previous comments, it is a protected class if we say it's a protected class. That's the way it is. We simply write it into law. That's what it is. Now, again, we are experiencing people doing heinous acts, fire bombs, this, that, all this other stuff, based on a political affiliation. They don't like somebody's political affiliation, and for some reason, they think that that gives them the right to go out and destroy property, to harass people, to do all this other stuff. And again, clearly, it is a protected class if we say it is a protected class, Mr. President. So I urge your support.
Right. They're literally lawmakers. They're on the floor debating laws that they want to pass. And I mean, we saw Democrats pass this education bill that creates new protected classes in a school setting. So if they want to say that something's a protected class of people, they can absolutely say it's a protected class of people. But what they don't want is for any conservatives or Trump supporters to suddenly find themselves in a protected class because, frankly, they want Trump supporters to continue to be harassed on the streets. Here again is Senator Dhingra.
It is a protected class if you change the law against discrimination, not amend the hate crime statute. So until the law against discrimination, where the political affiliation is a protected class, it is not one to be included in the hate crime statute. So I applaud what Senator Fortunato is trying to do, but what he is trying to change is the law against discrimination, and I will anticipate getting a bill with that change, and we can have that discussion at that point in time. So I'm asking for a no vote.
Is there anyone more condescending than her? That's very technical. I mean, I've been working on this stuff since 9/11. You really dum-dums wouldn't understand how technical this is, and we have to change this before we change this. No, you don't. No, you don't. You can change this, and then you can have something that says it's enacted, and we're going to change this too, to bring it all into alignment. But as I said, you guys have been adding protected classes left and right with radical gender ideology or whatever fits the mold. You just enjoy, genuinely, I do think you enjoy seeing Republicans targeted on the streets for their political beliefs, which is just disgusting. So they're going so hard, all these things, hate crime hotline, domestic violent extremism task force, giving millions of dollars to continue to study the issue, talk almost exclusively about right-wing violence in a state that is made fun of nationally for its left-wing violence and how common it is here. And then you want us to believe that you can't add political class and protect, conservatives or Trump supporters because, that's just a change to the law that we're not able to make at this time, but maybe next session we can get on this. No, you're okay with political violence and violence in general toward conservatives. You're not okay with violence or targeting of people who align with your ideology. So just come out and say what it is. Absolutely insane stuff. So again, we're waiting to figure out how the budget situation is going to shake out. And I know that a lot of you have a lot at stake. And it's not going to be pretty no matter what happens. The only thing that's going to fix all of this is having divided government and kicking the people out of power who have continued to spend beyond our means as a state, continue to fund things that the government should never be involved in funding, and continue to reach back into your pockets when they fail to balance a budget. So it's either going to be homeowners who pay the price this time tomorrow, or it's going to be big businesses or businesses in general that pay the price this time tomorrow. Either way, Washington State loses. So we will update you as soon as we know what they have been scheming and conniving over behind the scenes. All right, coming up next, this is a wild story about a very obvious, concerning conflict of interest as it pertains to the ongoing rent control legislation. We'll dive into that. First, I've talked about my success on the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan, down 40 pounds. I've kept the weight off for 2 years. I constantly hear from undivided viewers and listeners who say that they've found success on the program as well. I mean, I lost 30 pounds in just the first 2 months of the program, which is pretty phenomenal. And it's not easy. I mean, you have to stick to the plan that they give you for 60 days. And if you're not capable of sticking to a plan, this is just not going to be the program for you. But for me, I found it easy. You tell me exactly what I need to do every day for 60 days. I can do that. I can do that if there's no room for error. And so what I would recommend is reaching out to Dr. Ryan Coogan and his team at eastsideweightlossklinic.com. They have a little calendar system. You can just book a 15-minute consultation, no obligation, doesn't cost you anything, and talk over the program with them. And to me, this is the only thing I've ever tried in my life that has given me some semblance of long-term success. You know, I've done a million crash diets and fad diets. You hear a lot of people taking drugs and injections, and then once they stop, just gaining the weight back. This, for me, is just about teaching you what to eat in the right portions, giving you some healthy habits that fit into your life. So if that sounds like something that appeals to you, eastsideweightlossklinic.com, eastsideweightlossklinic.com. All right, this story gets absolutely nuts. So first of all, it's okay to have biases as a lawmaker. Of course, you belong to a political party. It's okay as a lawmaker to have issues that you're passionate about, that you advocate for. And if you report conflicts of interest, there are even instances where it's okay for those conflicts to exist, as long as you're honest and upfront about them. And you put everything out there in the open. Like, for instance, in the segment we're about to do right now, I clearly have a bias and a personal agenda. We do a sponsored segment every week with the Rental Housing Association of Washington because we care about the housing issue. So we partnered with them when all the insanity was happening with the eviction nonsense and all of that. And so we do a sponsored segment. They're an advertiser on our show, the Rental Housing Association of Washington, which they represent landlords. And it's because we agree with them ideologically and we want to raise attention to these issues. And so we tell you, hey, this segment is sponsored by RHA. So is that a conflict? Does it impact how I cover these issues? I like to think it doesn't because we're on the same side of things, but at least you know, right? At least you know. So this is an example of just being honest, putting everything out there, okay? Something that State Senator Emily Alvarado has failed to do in epic fashion. So Senator Emily Alvarado is the key sponsor of the rent control bill, which has now, by the way, passed out of Senate Ways and Means. So that means it's heading for a vote on the floor of the Senate. And if it passes there, it's heading to the governor's desk for his signature. So we're getting dangerously close to putting our state in one hell of a housing predicament. But Senator Emily Alvarado, this is her child. This is her baby. She's been pushing for this during her time in the legislature the past 3 years. Here is Senator Alvarado introducing the proposal earlier this session.
Washingtonians are asking for pragmatic solutions to stop unnecessary and excessive rent increases. That's what this bill does. Washingtonians are asking for our help to rein in unjustifiable costs and make it easier to live, raise a family, and retire with dignity, and that's what this bill does. This is a balanced policy that caps and prevents excessive rent increases, but it lets landlords raise the rent each year, invest in the property, and make a profit.
So she's passionate about this issue. She was passionate about the issue last year and the year before that. But there's been some shady stuff already this session happening with now Senator Emily Alvarado, because remember, we talked about this on the show before. I just want to get everyone up to date on already the shady stuff happening here. She started the legislative session as a state representative. And then you had Senator Joe Wynn on the Democratic side, who was tapped by the governor to lead commerce. So that left a vacancy. And so Senator Emily Alvarado she was taken from the House and chose to fill a Senate seat in the upper chamber. So that was kind of like a promotion for her, right, to fill this seat. And so there was all this interesting timing that I can't say was against any rules, but it was definitely shady the way that it was done. So you remember the very first day of the legislative session, it was on a Monday, there was a committee hearing on rent control, which is kind of an odd thing. Not kind of, it's a very odd thing for the first day of the session to immediately fast track a bill like this for a committee hearing, because you have all this other stuff going on. And so it wasn't a surprise that it left very little time for public testimony on this. And at the time I thought, something is up here. Why are they holding a hearing on rent control day one? Well, it was because that gave Senator Emily Alvarado, at the time a representative, a chance to vote on rent control out of a committee on the House side on a Monday. Because the very next day, on a Tuesday, she would leave the House and be sworn in as a state senator. So that allowed her the next day, on a Wednesday, to be on the Senate side to also consider rent control as a senator. Had they not fast-tracked it on that Monday and given it a hearing that day, rent control, the votes lined up so that it might not have ever passed out of that House committee without her vote. So we've already discussed that on the show, just resetting this for you because it gets bad. So that just seemed super shady to us. Like, we're so interested in this, we might not have the votes, make sure it gets a hearing while she's still a state representative, swear her in the next day, put her in the Senate, and then she can also hear it as a senator. It's shady stuff. Illegal in any way? I don't think so, but shady nonetheless. Well, things get much shadier. So over the weekend, our friend Glenn Morgan, who operates We the Governed, he's like a great government watchdog, he filed an ethics complaint against Senator Emily Alvarado. The Center Square, to the best of my knowledge, is the only entity that has covered this so far. The headline, ethics complaint filed against Washington lawmaker behind rent stabilization bill. And it's because Glenn Morgan detected what was a very apparent, for anyone who cared to look, obvious conflict of interest between Alvarado working on the rent control bill and pushing it through in the manner that she has, and her day job. So let's read from this article. Glenn Morgan, in his complaint, said in particular, Alvarado is in violation of an RCW that has to do with activities incompatible with public duties and with RCW 4252-110 because of her employment with an organization that engages in lobbying efforts. Okay, so she's employed full-time in her day job by an organization that engages in lobbying efforts. Okay, well, what's her role in the lobbying efforts and what does this organization do? I bet you already know where I'm going with this. The article goes on to say, Senator Alvarado is a vice president for Pacific Northwest markets for Enterprise Community Partners. According to its website, she, quote, oversees Enterprise's work in Washington and Oregon to create and preserve affordable homes and bring programmatic solutions to scale through policy advocacy. Okay. So she is a regional vice president for an organization that advocates for affordable housing. Let's continue. She's getting, this is from Glenn Morgan, quoted in the Center Square, she's getting substantial compensation for her work on housing policy from her non-legislative employer, who is lobbying for the very bill that she's promoting, HB 1217. So they're basically, in Glenn Morgan's words, paying her and then lobbying to make sure that a bill she's backing gets passed. So strip politics out of it. Imagine this was a Republican state senator. They work full-time for an organization that actively lobbies and pushes for a bill that lawmaker is the chief sponsor of in the legislature. If there's not a more obvious conflict of interest than that. But something I want to go dig into deeper that wasn't in the Center Square story is how Senator Alvarado financially benefits from all of this. And again, you could think maybe there's an innocent explanation for some of the stuff I'm about to show you. But when you take it in combination with all the other really shady stuff that's going on, it starts to paint a picture for you. So now Senator Emily Alvarado was first elected to the state house in 2022. Okay, that's very important. Now, as part of being in elected office, you have to file your financial disclosures with the Public Disclosure Commission. So this basically includes any companies you work for, any pay that you receive, any assets that you own, just honestly as a way to sort of show any conflicts of interest that might exist, any sort of investments lawmakers might have, or any sort of stake they might have in some of the policies that they're pushing. So at the time in 2022, when she filed her first public affairs or financial affairs disclosure, she was employed then by this company, Enterprise Community Partners, as an area vice president. That was her title back then. It's her title now. Now, you have to report your income, and it's based on a pay range. So you don't report your exact income. You choose one of the pay ranges that they provide to you. So at the time in 2022, the income pay range was $60,000 to $99,000. So that was the one that she selected. So she gets into the state house. She immediately starts pushing for rent control. So we looked up her financial disclosures for 2023, 2024, and 2025. Now, this is as a state lawmaker who is now actively pushing rent control, a policy supported by her full-time employer. Her pay immediately jumps up. In 2023, it went from $60,000 to $99,000 to $100,000 to $199,000. In 2024, it went to $200,000 to $500,000, somewhere in that pay range. And then in 2025, she reported an income between $100,000 and $199,000. So taking those into consideration, my guess is she makes around $200,000 a year. And in 2024, it maybe bumped right past 200,000, so it put her into that higher bracket. So her pay doubles just like that. You'll also notice her title was the same. Her title didn't change, area vice president. So the only thing that changed from 2022 in the financial disclosures to 2023, 2024, and 2025 is that she went from not being a lawmaker to being elected a lawmaker, actively pushing for a policy, rent control, that her full-time employer is down in Olympia lobbying for. Just like that. Up in the next pay bracket. Sounds suspicious to you? It does. It is suspicious. And even if she offers some sort of innocent explanation for all of this, it's a flagrant rule violation. And it doesn't look good. And that's the problem with conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest, and the reason why you need to disclose them and be transparent about the activity and what you might be engaged in and recuse yourself if necessary, we talk about this all the time with judges, is conflict of interest. You might be able to work past it. You might still be able to call balls and strikes or whatever it is, but to the public, it doesn't look good. And it doesn't look like you're operating in good faith. So now we're potentially days away from rent control being sent to the governor's desk. And the lawmaker who is the prime sponsor of that is employed to the tune of around $200,000 a year by an advocacy organization that is in Olympia lobbying for that very bill that on the first day of session she helped vote on as a member of the House so she could quickly move over to the Senate and make sure it had enough votes there too. That's nuts. That's about the most blatant conflict of interest I've ever heard discussed in Olympia. And I'm shocked that it took someone this long to notice it and to file a complaint. I mean, Democrats might have noticed it before, but it's their person, so we're just going to sweep that under the rug. But Glenn Morgan now filing a complaint. Now, I don't know how long it will take for that complaint to be investigated. And what happens if they find that she is in violation of these state laws against, how did they word it? Against activities incompatible with public duties. Does she have to quit her job? Does she have to do a different role in that job? Can she just continue to do both and just pay PDC fines? I don't know. Does she even care if rent control is already signed into law by then? So these things go under the radar when no one notices or the media isn't asking questions. And now we got all this way into the legislative session, days away from this bill being signed into law, and this big of a conflict of interest is exposed. You cannot be employed to the tune of $200,000 or so a year by a company that is actively in Olympia lobbying to pass a bill that you're the prime sponsor of. Absolutely insane. Corruption at the deepest levels. Anyone who cares about the optics of this shouldn't want to touch rent control with a 100-foot pole. It just looks bad. I would hope that there's some senators, some of her fellow senators, who also understand how bad this looks and how if it was a Republican doing it, it never would be allowed to stand. They would never vote for something that had that much bad juju on it. And hopefully Bob Ferguson, who cares about his public image more than anything, even if he's inclined to sign rent control, won't want to touch it with a 100-foot pole either. And will veto it, if not for any other reason than the conflict of interest here with Senator Alvarado. Absolutely wild stuff. All right, coming up next, I guess he does want to sue over it. I said on the show, I can't imagine he'd want to get involved in this one. But yeah, Attorney General Nick Brown wants to sue over Donald Trump trying to ensure that people who vote are lawfully in the country. We'll discuss that. First, seems like a good day to maybe get a second opinion on our retirement portfolios. I talk about Bulwark Capital and our friend Zach Abraham all the time. Zach and his team specialize in managing risk. And I appreciate Zach. I reached out to him over the weekend. We're trying to, he's been traveling, but we're trying to link up with him this week to talk about what's happening with tariffs in the markets. And I pinged him over the weekend and I was sort of like, dude, I don't know what to think about all this. I can't trust any outlet. And he was very measured in the way that he looked at this. Like, look, if Trump takes things too far, it is going to be bad. He's walking a very thin line, and he's someone who likes Donald Trump. And so it tells me that he's able to look at these issues like by pulling his personal politics out of it. So I think if you're worried about your retirement portfolio, particularly if you're getting close, you're already in retirement, reach out to our friend Zach Abraham for a free Know Your Risk portfolio review. It's basically a second opinion. He'll take a look at how your money is being managed, see if he thinks that there are better ways to sort of manage against situations like we've been dealing with last week with some market volatility. So sign up right now, knowyourriskradio.com. Don't put it off, knowyourriskradio.com. All right, Attorney General Nick Brown, of course, he's engaged in all of these ideologically driven lawsuits, even though he campaigned as a moderate. I guess, fool us once, fool me once. Shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So I won't fall for that next time around because clearly he's just picking up where Bob Ferguson left off. Anything Orange Man does is bad and worthy of spending millions of dollars of your tax money going after it in court. And now he wants to sue and is suing because Donald Trump wants to confirm that people are lawful citizens of the United States before they cast a ballot. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. Yeah, and it's also Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, who I think is a moderate, is also in support of this, which to me, it's like choosing your battles. And I have failed to see any example of either of them really explaining what is wrong with a step confirming citizenship. What is the problem with that? You can go to a DMV, motor voter law, get a license. Illegals can get licenses in Washington state. And it's basically like you have to self-report because they'll automatically register you to vote. And you have to kind of self-report that you're not a legal citizen and because you attest to it. And you can't vote. So we're relying on illegal immigrants who came here illegally and already broke laws to attest to the fact that they're not able to vote. Doesn't that seem problematic? Couldn't you very easily figure all that out with just a simple step? But no, we can't do that because it's just ideologically not what Democrats support. So the state of Washington has, along with Oregon, now filing a lawsuit against the Trump administration in United States District Court. And it has to do with not just the not just the lawful status thing, but also other election integrity efforts that President Donald Trump is taking. According to a press release from the Attorney General's office, the states of Washington and Oregon today filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration's illegal executive order attacking elections and voting rights. The lawsuit seeks to declare most provisions of the order unconstitutional and prevent the federal government from implementing or enforcing them. It goes on to say, the order from the president would require votes sent by mail to arrive no later than Election Day to be counted, even though 18 states, including Washington and Oregon, accept ballots postmarked on or before Election Day. The order's illegal and this is his words, by the way. The order's illegal and burdensome proof of citizenship requirements will disenfranchise voters. About 9% of U.S. citizens of voting age do not have such documents readily available. So let's take those are two very different things, right? I actually agree with the state of Washington on the postmark date thing. To me, if you vote, look, this is the system we have. You can vote by mail. So if you had a situation like Trump wants, where it has to arrive no later than Election Day, and we allow people to put their ballots through USPS, then you're trying to mentally do the math of what is the last day I could drop it in the mail and just hope and pray that USPS gets it there on time. That's a disaster. That's not going to work. Like, look, I understand people want to repeal the whole mail-in voting system, but as it is, that's just not functional. Postmarking it by Election Day, even that, though that prolongs the voting counting, is the only thing that's going to work. Unless you say you can't use USPS and you have to drop it in a ballot drop box by Election Day. And USPS just take it completely off the table. So I actually agree with him on that. But it's this whole idea that it is overly burdensome to have the appropriate documents to ensure that you're legally able to vote. You have to have appropriate documents to buy alcohol. You have to have appropriate documents to buy cigarettes and vapes. But we don't think that we should have appropriate documents to vote for, I don't know, the President of the United States? It's such an asinine argument. 9% of U.S. citizens voting age do not have such documents readily available. Well, then they don't care enough to vote. So if you're voting age, you're 18, and you don't have by 18, I mean, let's say you're going to school or you're going to college or you have a driver's license and you pay bills. Maybe if you're a lawful citizen, you're probably by age 18 paying taxes, a lot of them. You're saying nothing you've done up to age 18 has put you in a position to have the necessary documents to present and prove citizenship. That's an asinine argument. I don't understand how you win that one. And again, the whole motor voter law, like, hey, can you provide proof of lawful citizenship? Like, oh, here's my birth certificate and whatever, one other document from the list that they want you to present. You might have to go dig it out of your mom's coat closet. I know, I remember at one point trying to find my birth certificate. It's like, Mom, you got to find that, digging through the junk drawers or whatever it is. It exists, okay? There's ways around it. The idea that we have to present identification for all these other aspects of our life. What is something else dumb you have to present ID for? Probably to get a
just
tattoo.
To get in the bar.
Just to get in a bar. I had to show my ID this weekend for alcohol.
Technically, you should have it to present a credit card or a debit card. If you have anything other than cash, then they should ask you for your ID.
They don't.
They don't always.
They used to.
They should.
They used to a lot more. There's all these other aspects of society you have to present an ID for. It is not asking too much to present an ID just to avoid. Do I think that there are large swaths of illegals voting in Washington state? No. I know Republicans like to blame that because they would rather do that than contend with the reason why they keep losing. Do I think there's some fraudulent voters? Sure. I mean, even if you are illegal and you are automatically registered through motor voter when you got a driver's license, it still is a felony to vote because you knowingly voted when you're not a citizen of the country. But somebody would have to find that out. I don't know if your sister who doesn't like Donald Trump would have to tell on you or whatever it is. Like, hey, my brother is in the country illegally and he voted for Donald Trump. Like, go get him. That's really the only way they're going to figure it out. They don't have systems in place to do this automatically. Why is that so hard? So I'm all for it with the ballot date postmark thing. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not going to be feasible. And I don't like relying on USPS anyway. They're a failing government entity. But the whole don't show ID because it's going to disenfranchise people. No, I'll tell you what disenfranchises people. their vote having the same impact as someone's vote who's not even a citizen of this country. That disenfranchises me. If my vote counts as one and your vote counts as one and you're not even a citizen of the country for the elections that you're voting in, that disenfranchises me. But I'm just a white lady, white bigot. I don't know. It's just crazy. All right. So the revocations of visas for some of these activist students has hit Washington State and the University of Washington. So as a reminder, Secretary of State Marco Rubio talked about the reasons why some of these visas are being revoked for certain students on college campuses across the country.
I think it's crazy. I think it's stupid for any country in the world to welcome people into their country that are going to go to your universities as visitors. They're visitors. And say, I'm going to your universities to start a riot. I'm going to your universities to take over a library and harass people. I don't care what movement you're involved in. Why would any country in the world allow people to come and disrupt? Now, we gave you a visa to come and study and get a degree, not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses. And if we've given you a visa and then you decide to do that, we're going to take it away. I encourage every country to do that, by the way, because I think it's crazy to invite students into your country that are coming onto your campus and destabilizing it. We're just not going to have it. So we'll revoke your visa, and once your visa is revoked, you're illegally in the country and you have to leave. Every country in the world has a right to decide who comes in as a visitor and who doesn't. If you invite me into your home because you say, I want to come to your house for dinner, and I go to your house and I start putting mud on your couch and spray painting your kitchen, I bet you're going to kick me out. Well, we're going to do the same thing if you come into the United States as a visitor and create a ruckus for us. We don't want it. We don't want it in our country. Go back and do it in your country. But you're not going to do it in our country.
It cracks me up that people talk about this as a free speech issue, because one of the best points that Marco Rubio has made about this, and I'm all for free speech, but he said if you had, put this on your application to get a student visa to come here and you had said like you're going to be engaged in these protests and vandalism on campus, we never would have granted your visa. So now you've shown us that you're going to do that, so we're going to take your visa away. And to me, it's a privilege to get one of those visas to come and study in the United States. And so taking away for those kinds of actions that destabilize, that terrorize, I don't see the conflict in that. So we've learned, the University of Washington putting out a statement that 5 UW students have had their visas revoked. Now, they don't outright say it's over them being little terrorists on campus. But given what's happening elsewhere in the rationale for it, I think we are left to assume that this is why, and it sounds like the University of Washington is also assuming that this is why. It says, the University of Washington has learned that 5 current UW students plus 4 recent graduates participating in post-graduation training have had their visas unilaterally canceled by the federal government without prior notice. We are deeply concerned about the well-being of these students and graduates and are working to support them. We have no indication these actions are due to activism or other protected free speech. Interesting. Okay. So now I'm like, well, what is it for? If they think it's not for that, then I guess what could it be? Maybe they're spies. Maybe they found out they're spies from China or something. But what drives me nuts is UW is like, automatically, we're going to take care of these students. So they're saying they don't know why the visas are revoked, but they're going to offer all these services to the students anyway. And I'm thinking, what if they were Chinese spies or something? Or what if they were involved in the terror of Jewish students on campus? It says, in a situation like this, the relevant campus International Student Services Office immediately reaches out to the affected individuals to encourage them to contact the office as soon as possible so we can help them with information and resources. These resources include access to legal services, as well as mental health and academic support. So UW's going to pay for them to for their attorneys.
I mean, they probably do need mental help. But
and for their counseling, you should have paid for their counseling a couple of years ago. And maybe they wouldn't be in this situation. So it's interesting because I guess, and I misstated that UW is assuming it's over the protest because they say they have no indication that it is, but I would be left wondering if that's not it, then what?
They just said that they weren't told. Doesn't mean they don't think it is.
Well, it says we have no indication these actions are due to activism or other protected free speech. So that tells me that they don't see a tie with it.
Well,
it's a very vague.
They're choosing not to see a tie.
Well, maybe. I mean, that's very possible. But it's a vague statement. But clearly, given what's happening elsewhere in the country, this would seem to fall in line with that. But it could be something even worse. Maybe they're little Hamas support. Maybe they're members of Hamas. Maybe they're spies for China or somewhere else. But they're going to get free legal support and free counseling before I guess we send them on their way. I don't know. Very strange. So we'll monitor that one. Okay, coming up next, we'll talk a little bit about the stock market uncertainty and get to our subscriber show polls from yesterday and today. First, the market right now, the housing market right now is great if you're a home seller. I mean, there is so much pent-up demand out there that if a good house hits the market, people are scooping it up and the prices are great. Two things have to happen, though. Your home has to hit the market priced correctly, and that is absolutely an art. Wes Jones is very good at that art. He's going to start by giving you a free market analysis so you can set your expectations, and he can walk you through his strategy and where that listing price is going to begin. And then, of course, your home needs to be properly prepared for sale. I mean, gone are the days, and maybe not gone, they'll come back someday, where it's like, I can throw this busted up shack on the market in Seattle and get $2 million for it. Now you gotta spruce that place up a little bit, but you want to make sure that the marketing material looks good and that your home is properly prepared for sale, because those are the homes that are going the quickest and for the highest dollar, and that's what Wes Jones specializes in through his Listing Boost concierge service. So reach out to Wes Jones if you're thinking about selling your home. May is going to be a fantastic month of the year to sell your home. And again, reach out to a few real estate agents by all means. I think Wes would be more than happy for you to do that. Reach out to 10 if you want. Wes Jones and his team have the best services to offer. Sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. Okay, look, I am not a tariff expert. This isn't a store. This isn't a show about where I go into deep dives on market volatility and all of that. Like, I'm going to leave that to the experts. I will say, though, it is increasingly difficult to figure out who the experts are. Because if you look on social media, it's either this is the best decision any president has ever made ever, or it's like this is the end of the world and Trump should be impeached. And even as someone who consumes news, it is very hard to find sources that are actually willing to take the time to explain what's happening, the thought process behind it, explain the pros and cons. And then I see all these absolutely asinine. This one was from a guy named Ryan Saavedra. I think he's a conservative, which makes this one all the more weird. Mm-hmm. He posted I'm guaranteeing it's made up, this text exchange that he says he had. He says, a good friend of mine who is conservative, right-wing Republican just sent me this. You start messing around with people's investments in 401ks and you're going to lose support fast. So this is a text exchange he had with a friend. It says, dude, this is his friend, I guess. Dude, no shit, I'm voting Democrat. Legit thought I'd never say that. Newsom for sure. Any Dem in Congress. Just insane this is happening. And then Ryan allegedly responds, can I take a screenshot of that and post it? I'll not include your name or anything. He says, sure, even if Trump reverses course on Monday, it's too late. I can't trust him again. Holes out some random chart with made up numbers and triggers worst 3-day crash since 1980s. I'm done. Things that didn't happen for 500, Alex. You're telling me a Trump supporter who he characterized as a conservative right-wing Republican, it took him 3 days to decide he's going to vote for Gavin Newsom? Like, people are so disingenuous. That never happened. Never happened. I've seen Republicans who are upset with the tariff situation. I've seen Republicans who don't think it's a good idea. But none of the real-life Republicans with real pictures and names who I know are saying, I'm going to vote for Gavin Newsom. Like, absolutely give me a break. And I'm not sure where look, it's not a breaking news show, so I'm not going to talk about where the stocks are right now, because somebody could listen to it in an hour and be like, well, that's not where the stocks are right now. But there was a little bit of up and down, and there's certainly been volatility. And I've heard from people in my family who've lost a lot of money in the last 3 days. And I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't suck to lose money. It absolutely sucks to lose money. I'm still of the mind, though, that I'm willing to wait and see what happens. There have already been countries that are coming in, trying to broker deals. I'm also open to the possibility that this ends up being a colossal mistake. I'm just trying to keep a cool head about things, give it more than 3-4 days, and see whether in the long term it's going to be beneficial for our country and for the economy. I do feel for people who are just close to retirement or in retirement and are seeing their retirement savings drop by 5 figures or 6 figures. But it's not the first time that we've seen in our lifetimes a major sort of economic collapse and then bounced back from it. So that's kind of where my mind's at right now. But I wanted to know where your guys' minds are at. So I did a subscriber show poll yesterday, even though we didn't have a show, and it is tied to today's subscriber show poll. So yesterday I asked you, how concerned are you about the economic impacts of Trump's tariffs? Not at all, getting a bit worried or very concerned. Not at all getting a bit worried or very concerned. I would say when I put this poll out yesterday, getting a bit worried would have probably reflected where I was at yesterday. Like getting a tad worried. Nicole?
Yeah, I'm probably somewhere between getting a bit worried, or actually not getting a bit worried. I mean, I'm always worried something doesn't work out the way that it's supposed to. So I think since the beginning, I would say not worried and a bit worried, but somewhere in between there. I mean, I kind of trust the process. And again, this is what we voted for. Yeah. So I think like we're getting exactly what we voted for. I sent you a video. He said he was going to do this, or he had this idea.
Yeah. On the Oprah Winfrey show.
13 years ago, said this is what his plan was.
Yeah.
If
and he
ever
said
had to get there.
The exact same thing now.
Yeah.
So, right. Over on Patreon and locals for that. So 56% said on Monday they're not worried at all. 39% said getting a bit worried. 5% said very concerned. Beth said, I'm a bit worried, but I think it's overall a good move for the country. Joan said, give it time to work before I worry. If these people don't like the added fee, maybe don't buy it. If you have to ask, you can't afford it. Oh, yeah, if the tariff puts it out of reach for you, maybe you can't afford it. But there are also some things that come in from overseas that are necessities for people. Bill, everyone would do well to turn off Democrat-owned media and chill for a year or so. Don't check your stock portfolio until next year. Changing a country the way our president is takes time. The cards will fall where they may. Relax, all is well. Relax is not characterizing what people on the left are doing right now. So I followed up with the show poll today for subscribers. Have you made any changes to your money management or investments due to the past week's market volatility? Yes or no? So did you dive in and you're like, I'm going to go pull something out of this? Nicole, any changes?
No, now is not the time. Now you have to wait it out. If you didn't do it 2 weeks ago, you wait it out.
I'm too lazy to do that anyway. I'm the set it and forget it kind of person. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I don't think it's going to get worse. I think that was the initial reaction, and I am by no means an expert at all. But I think that with anything Trump does, there's an initial reaction, and then things level out, and then we figure out if it's going to be long-term or not. So yeah. I think that's just how it works.
Most people, 90% saying no. Sandy says, for those of us close to retirement, we won't have time to wait for the rebound. And again, I understand that. I understand that something like this, depending on the outcome, has a much bigger impact for someone who is in their 50s or 60s or 70s versus someone who's in their mid-30s. And so I want to keep that in mind while I talk about sort of how people should feel about this. Kayla, I'm just hanging out, playing the long game, just chilling. Kayla's just chilling. Mouse Killers says, buy low, sell high. Isn't that the way to make money if you're not Nancy Pelosi? Yeah, I wonder what Nancy Pelosi did with her stocks. Let's see. John, the same thing happened in 2020. It came back strong the last couple of years. It will again. Stop panicking. Sharon says, yeah, I've changed it. I've been buying up stocks. Bill says, my portfolio manager advised me to stay the course. Sunny Day says, wait it out or buy. Huh. Yeah, interesting. I love it.
I mean, you still have more money now than you did with Biden. It's still much above that. So,
but I saw these interesting. I mean, I think people look at it as self-inflicted versus COVID, right? And maybe you have more of a, COVID was what it was, and nobody could really do anything about it. And this is more of an actual decision with implications that you could predict. So I'm not freaking out. I just the internet. There are very few good sources on the internet. And that's why I told Zach when we can pin him down this week, I need him to come on the show and talk us either off a ledge or on a ledge. I'm not really sure what I'm going to get from him because he's a Trump supporter, but he's very independent minded. And I mean, this is what he specializes in. And when you're looking at risk, there's a lot of risk involved. I said that the tariffs are a gamble for sure. And we might not see them pay off for a long time.
I also think the stock market is the stock market, and you are always gambling with money, and that isn't a sure thing. Every time you put money into pay into these, like, this is part of the game, right? Yeah. So I don't know, I'm just not at the worry about it too much yet.
Yeah, it's tough, and I get it. Like, you might be in a different situation with your retirement and all of that, so I'm never going to tell somebody how they should feel. I'm not going to tell you freak out, panic, or not freak out. But there's a lot of people on the internet being like, oh, my conservative friend said they're not voting for Republicans ever again. I'm like, they didn't say that. You don't have a conservative friend. Give me a break. Okay. All right. I did want to fit this in just because it's relevant to a story we have been talking about. So Education Secretary Linda McMahon says that they are launching I think we're getting closer to D-Day for Washington State on the radical gender ideology. As much as I've been infuriated that we haven't drawn the attention of Donald Trump just yet, and that he's focusing on Maine or whatever it is, well, we have boys competing against girls right here in Washington State all the time. With some of these announcements, I see that I think it's going to be imminent. So Education Secretary Linda McMahon announced that they've formed a special investigation team to look into states and school districts where these things are happening.
Today, the Department of Education, alongside the Department of Justice, is proud to announce the creation of the Title IX Special Investigations Team, consisting of attorneys and investigators from both of our agencies to adjudicate our ever-increasing volume of Title IX investigations. We have received a staggering number of complaints about men competing in women's sports and invading women-only intimate spaces. That's why we're partnering with Attorney General Brandi's team to move even faster in order to protect women and girls. The establishment of this team will benefit women and girls across this nation who have been subjected to discrimination and indignity in their educational activities. To all entities receiving federal funding who continue to allow these illegal practices, we will not permit you to trample on women's rights any longer.
Amen. And like there was a couple crazy stories over the weekend. The pool championship with two dudes. It's like the thing. It's absolute parody. I also saw this frisbee golf championship, which I didn't know people gathered around and cheered on frisbee golf. No offense if that's your sport. But the announcer's like, oh, I think it was Danielle was the name of the player. So, oh, look at the strength that she throws it with. Danielle or whatever her name was is a dude. It's just like, oh my gosh, you guys are living in the twilight world. That is absolutely, utterly insane. So hopefully this leads to some change in Washington State. I will say I saw this interesting Facebook post from Democratic State Representative Tara Simmons. And I thought, wait a second, is she on our side of this issue? She was talking about Hope. Her dog was doing a quick trip to visit someone, trying to remember there is hope we will win the fight against the patriarchy. Okay. I don't know if this is what she's talking about, but if Tara Simmons wants to fight the patriarchy with all of us, let's start with girls' sports and girls' spaces. Considering she supports men being housed in women's prisons, I have to imagine that's not what she's talking about, but it's interesting she wants to fight the patriarchy and also is perfectly fine with sending dangerous men into women's prisons. Weird, isn't it? Cute dog, though. Super cute dog. I want a dog with a stroller. I'll never make fun of somebody with a dog and a stroller.
No, you don't.
Oh, hell yeah, I do. I want a stroller big enough to push Lucky around in. That would have to be a big stroller.
Yeah.
Or of a cart, really. But now the second you start pushing around a cat, that's where I draw the line. That's where I draw the line.
Judgy.
Okay, I've encouraged you guys to take the First Mark Challenge, firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com. Look, we all need insurance. The question is, do you have the right insurance to fit your needs and to make sure that you're covered in the case that the worst happens. So that's step number one. I mean, you don't want to cheap out on insurance and then your house burns down. You're like, well, I'm screwed. So you want to make sure you have good insurance that covers your needs, but you also want to make sure you're getting the best price. And the question is, if you're doing this all on your own and you're out there shopping the market, how confident are you that you really have the insurance you need at the best price? Well, First Mark Insurance can help you with that, and you never pay them anything for their services. So taking the First Mark Challenge to me really is a no-brainer, especially if kind of the budget is tight or you just got that renewal notice from your insurance company and the costs are creeping up. Well, have First Mark Insurance take a look. We get wonderful stories from undivided viewers and listeners all the time who, even if they don't end up using First Mark, they write us to tell us about the exceptional service they received and just what they learned from the experience. So it just really is a win-win. Michelle says that they got a renewal with their existing provider for the next 6 months and their bill went from $3,000 to $8,000. Well, she reached out to First Mark. They saved her 50%. So that's just one of many, many examples. Firstmarkinsurance.com. Firstmarkinsurance.com. The very best part is they work for you, not the insurance companies. All right, let's get to some subscriber comments on the Emily Alvarado situation. Sergeant Pickles says they're lining the pockets of future employers at our expense. It's not incompetence. It is disdain for regular people they see as lesser than them. Yeah, and also, like, she's making bank. There's something that drives me nuts about. Maybe I'm wrong on this. You could think like, oh, if somebody's really rich and they're advocating for the little guy and rent control, you could think that that's like, oh, that's a very good thing to do. It's like a very just thing to do. But when you've got somebody whining about income inequality and trying to tax middle-class people to compensate for it, and they're making $200,000 a year plus their legislative salary, like, that just doesn't sit right with me. Like, when you're actively talking about passing taxes, like taxing homeowners out of their homes. So the working class and the middle class, they have to bear the burden of the programs that you want to fund, like reparations and cutting $120,000 checks to Black first-time home buyers. And then you're sitting pretty with your, probably $250,000 a year. You're doing just fine. And it's the people who are below that on the cusp of being able to pay their bills who are being punished. Something that rubs me the wrong way about that. Bo Marsh, that is the Democrats for you. A bunch of hypocritical, unethical crooks. Not too harsh, I don't think. Mike Cameron, an oath means nothing in this state. Our Washington Democrats are so dishonest, it makes me sick. I'm not saying there's not dishonest Republicans. We just don't have a lot of Republicans in our state. But hell, if you can show me a conflict of interest from a Republican state lawmaker that's that bad, send it on over and we'll cover it on the show. Hello, Watermelon. What a pleasant screen name on the Nick Brown situation. My belief that you can't say the ballot has to arrive by election day because USPS cannot be trusted to do that. Hello Watermelon says, no, I don't want elections dragging out over weeks while we wait for postmarked ballots. One day only, you have more than enough time to mail it in. Ivy Ann says, pretty sure you have to have an ID to buy a goldfish at PetSmart. Oh, do you? What about
I don't know if that's true, but I'm sure there are some pets that you definitely do.
Yeah. Bobby Lee, BS, vote in person with ID, period. As long as we have vote by mail, we will have fixed crooked elections. Barron says, federal law requires no ballots after midnight on election day may be counted now. Brandi, mail-in voting is bad. Stop being lazy. I'm not being lazy. I'm being realistic. In a perfect world, like, would I be okay with in-person voting? Sure. I like vote by mail because I'm not going to abuse the system. I understand some of the concerns with it, some of the problems with it. We live in a deep blue state with a Democratic trifecta nearing a supermajority, and they're never going to get rid of mail-in voting. So the first step is trying to win elections. And I don't think the way to win elections is to just complain about how elections are done and suggest that if only elections were fixed, we would win elections. I think there's a lot of other problems and branding issues that stop and terrible run campaigns that stop Republicans from getting elected. I just think it's, speaking of lazy, I love you though, I think it's a lazy excuse that like we're not winning because of vote by mail. Now, I also don't think that either party would support any changes to an election process that doesn't benefit them, right? So Democrats have to believe that vote by mail benefits them, or they wouldn't defend it so rigorously. And the same is Republicans have to believe that vote in person benefits them, or they wouldn't push for it so vigorously. So everyone's advocating for the election rules and regulations that they believe will benefit the party or the politicians of their choice. So let's also be intellectually honest about that. But, there is less room for error in a vote in person.
I think it's benefit for different reasons, though. Yeah. Benefit because of something legal or illegal.
Well,
so that's Republicans are defending because they think that would make it more legal and less.
It's a good point.
And Democrats maybe.
Yeah, as long as you're not advocating for in-person elections because you want to disenfranchise a certain segment of voters that you think are less likely to show up. I mean, when you have vote in-person elections in some southern states where there are lines that you're waiting for 5 hours, that is disenfranchising voters. It's unacceptable. And to me, it is a problem. It is an election problem. And they want to say, well, if you believe in democracy, you should be willing to stand on your feet for 5 hours. No, that's ridiculous. Some people literally can't stand on their feet for 5 hours. So there has to be some way between like standing in an endless line in the hot sun with no food and water for 5 hours just to cast a ballot, and maybe a little more protection and chain of custody.
Yeah, you know what might help?
Issues.
ID.
Right, my ID. Like, hey, you know what? We'll keep vote by mail. Just get rid of motor voter and require proof of citizenship for every single person who gets a ballot. Like a little middle ground. That's all I'm saying. Baron, call me lazy. You did pay me $5 to call me lazy, though, so that's okay. On UW, Krista says, hopefully this is a step into the federal government paying attention to the insanity happening in Washington. Let me see. On stocks, my cup of tea 101. As a Gen Z, the stock market is going up and down. The stock market going up and down isn't new. What I hope is if this can foster something good for my generation, like owning a home or growing a family. And again, it is easier. So Gen Z are you Gen Z?
Technically I'm X. I'm right on the
I'm a millennial.
on the line, depending on, or yeah, so I'm, X. No.
Because I'm an elder millennial. I'm about as old as a millennial gets.
Yeah, and I'm right before you.
Yes.
So whatever that is.
Before, like born before me. Yeah. Just so we're clear.
Both on the line.
We're both on the line. And yeah, it's easier for me. I'm not going to sit here and tell my mom or whoever it is not to be upset about losing money. I'm never going to do that. Because everybody's situations are different. Everyone has different plans for retirement, different lengths of time until retirement, or they need to tap into that money. So I'm never going to sit here and preach to someone that, like, just deal with it. So
but she's right. There is a long game to this too.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, that's what we elect. We elect people to think about the long game too. Right. And that's what hasn't been happening the last, I don't know, few decades.
Hey, I agree. Before I get to closing sanity check, wow, I was looking at myself in the show. The pink lipstick doesn't look good on me. Looks like I have no lipstick on at all. I got rid of the red lipstick because it's, spring. Not good. Not good. Tangents. So next week, we're all on spring break next week. So there's going to be some changes in the schedule. We won't have any live shows. However, I will tell you now that we have been working on a special with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So I've been able to go out with agents on a drug bust and to talk to ICE about some of what they're doing in our communities and some of the pushback that they're getting, particularly in the sanctuary states. We look forward to airing that report next week. We'll also have some other content while we were gone on vacation, and then I will be back in time for the final week of the legislative session. So we'll make sure that we button that up with all of you and all see what bad stuff makes it across the finish line, what good stuff, if any, makes it across the finish line. Probably not very much of that. And then how much our taxes are going to go up. So just FYI, and we'll keep reminding you that we're not going to have live shows next week. With that, let's get to our closing sanity check. All right. So I've talked how much I hate emergency clauses on bills. It's an abuse. First of all, it's a big middle finger to voters. So Democrats will just put an emergency clause onto the end of any bill that they think is controversial enough that people might want to run a referendum on it. And if you put an emergency clause on it, you can't run a referendum on it. You have to run an initiative, which is much more difficult and much more costly. So Democrats in the last few years have gotten into this pattern of anything it's never an emergency, but anything slightly controversial, emergency clause goes into effect immediately. So you can imagine how much absolute joy I got when Governor Bob Ferguson was signing some of his first bills as governor. And there was a bipartisan bill. Senator Mark Elias was, I think, the lead sponsor or one of the lead sponsors on it. And the idea of the bill is it ensures the state's Medicaid program will continue to cover HIV antiviral drugs without pre-authorization. So this bill, for whatever reason, got an emergency clause attached to it. Now, I don't know if it was specifically because they wanted to avoid a referendum or he really thought it was an emergency for some reason. I'll tell you who didn't think it needed an emergency clause: Bob Ferguson.
This bill ensures Washingtonians living with HIV can access critical preventative drugs. That is a basic right. I am vetoing the emergency clause as unnecessary because this bill codifies current practices and is already funded in the Health Care Authority's base expenditures.
The best part of that, if you watched closely, is Senator Mark Elias off to the side shaking his head. As Bob Ferguson said he's going to veto his emergency clause. So he's like, oh, how dare you do that? Oh, I was like, inject that right into my veins. That's the sanity I needed. That has been our sanity check for today. That has been our episode for today. Buckle up, because I think sometime between now and the show tomorrow, we're going to find out just how bad the new tax situation is. And so that's going to be, I think, a make or break for a lot of Washingtonians who have been on the cusp of wanting to move out of the state or believing that they can't afford it here. The same goes for businesses. So I think we're going to find out a lot in the next 24 hours. And the only show that's going to help you understand what happens, what it means, give you all the necessary context is going to be our show. So make sure you're back here at noon tomorrow. In the meantime, if you have not signed up to support our show, you can do it for $5 a month by signing up at undividedpod.com. Just click on the red banner that says support the show for $5. We make it as obvious as possible. And if you're a veteran, a member of the military, or a first responder, you can get get 30% off your first year with the promo code USA. See you tomorrow.